This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market stocks fell today as signs of a second wave of coronavirus infections sapped risk appetite. There are fears that it will send many countries back into lockdowns and, of course, delay an economic recovery. Now, MSCI's index of emerging market shares was down 0.6% today after 2 days of gains. It has already lost about 18% so far this year. In Nigeria, market heavyweights Dangote Cement and MTN dragged the all-share down over 1%. South Africa's JSE saw sentiment a pickup as lockdown restrictions are eased. But analysts, of course, say a pickup in new cases in some countries has raised levels of cautions. Meanwhile, Egypt's EGX 30 climbed almost 3%. That's after Moody's rating service affirmed Egypt's rating at B2 today. Now, also coming up on today's show. The World Health Organization expresses optimism on treatment for the coronavirus. The International Monetary Fund renews calls for Ethiopia to devalue its currency. And a mechanical engineer in Somalia develops a ventilator to help his country deal with the pandemic. Now, the World Health Organization says that some treatments appear to be limiting the severity or the length of the COVID-19 disease. The health body adds that it is focusing on learning more about 4 or 5 of the most promising ones. More than 100 potential COVID-19 vaccines are being developed, including several in clinical trials. The WHO said in April a vaccine will take at least 12 months. Speaking during a briefing, WHO spokeswoman Margaret Harris, however, sounded a note of caution around expectations for a vaccine. She said coronaviruses in general are very tricky viruses that are difficult to produce vaccines against. Now, the respiratory illness has infected about 4.19 million people around the world. That's according to the latest figures. Meanwhile, South Africa is participating in the World Health Organization Solidarity Trial. It will be the country's main treatment trial in the battle against COVID-19. There are also several other local trials underway in the country. Angelo Coppola has more.
South Africa, along with over 100 countries, are working together to find an effective treatment for COVID-19. Under the WHO's Solidarity Trial, the country has agreed to participate in vaccine testing.
There are 3 groups that are busy working with international groups on vaccines, and so anticipate that we will be doing vaccine trials within the next month or so.
Globally, there are currently over 100 vaccines in various stages of development. Many are still in the early stages. 6 have been taken to the next level. Limited testing in the country of development.
Because we're trying to push these vaccine trials very quickly, these trials will be rolled over into much larger studies we call phase 3 trials, with thousands of participants who are at risk of acquiring COVID-19, so looking at hotspot areas or high incident areas. And there, once we have given the vaccine, we'll look for efficacy. We look to see, does this vaccine work and protect against infection completely or cause a less severe disease?
While South Africa and other developing countries will be involved in the vaccine trials, there's the issue of manufacture and access to the vaccine afterwards.
We're also concerned that the demand could then be swallowed up by richer, bigger countries that have got access to manufacturing, and that the poorer countries of the world, whole continents like the African region, might not get the same level of access.
It's been suggested that immunizing the world's healthcare workers would make more sense.
It will give us a very good idea of how well the vaccine works in the field in different communities, but it will keep the world's health services going, which is a critically important issue at the moment for all countries.
While the broader discussion is happening at a global political level, South Africa is preparing itself for those vaccine trials. The medical practitioners are going to be moving into those communities to do those vaccine trials where the people actually are and not in hospitals. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Hillbrow, South Africa.
Well, let's shift focus now. The International Monetary Fund has urged Ethiopia to accelerate the depreciation of its currency, the birr. Now, the global lender says the move should help stabilize the economy as well as reduce overvaluation and help the country cope with the coronavirus crisis. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
It has been a while since the IMF asked Ethiopian officials to consider the devaluation of the country's currency, birr. The International Monetary Fund believes birr is too strong, and so increasing the pace of a depreciation would help reduce real overvaluation and act as a shock absorber during the crisis of the COVID-19. The government said it is seriously considering IMF's recommendations, but will implement them slowly and cautiously. On the other hand, Ethiopia is working with all its financial institutions in the country in order to stabilize the economy and relieve the burden created by the spread of the coronavirus on individuals and businesses. One measure has been the injection of billions of birr into banks. IMF's document commends the move by authorities to continue reducing the gap between the official and parallel market rates of the birr. However, the document calls for monetary progress and caution as the country heads to a market clearing exchange rate. A week ago, the IMF Executive Board has approved $411 million emergency assistance for Ethiopia under the Rapid Financing Instrument to support the country on the way to fight against the COVID-19. Girum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, in Egypt, the International Monetary Fund Executive Board has also approved the country's rapid financing instrument. On Monday, it announced $2.77 billion, indicating confidence in the Egyptian economy. Now, Egypt is also negotiating another standby arrangement with the IMF. Here's Adel El Maroui with more.
It's official. Egypt is getting a new loan from the International Monetary Fund to ease the shocks COVID-19 caused to the economy. With remittances slowing down, Suez Canal revenues threatened, and tourism's vanishing, the country's foreign reserves have dropped to $37 billion from $45.5. So Egypt now knows where it will begin with the IMF's nearly $2.8 billion.
The government will use that rapid instrument to fill the immediate needs in the health sector, to provide relief for the tourism industry, which is now struggling to pay wages. This will help the government to preserve employment. It will also be used for the needs in the balance of payments.
Following the RFI approval, the IMF has immediately started negotiations for Egypt's standby arrangement request, estimated at $5.6 billion. This week it has praised Egypt's earlier economic reform, which it says has helped achieve a remarkable turnaround prior to the COVID-19 shock. The organization hinted that Egypt may need more expedited financing tools to steady the pandemic's impact.
Egypt will need additional financing for the next fiscal year. It's expecting to be struggling from COVID-19 in the 2020-2021 period. The growth rates are expected to draw back to about 2.4%. Egypt's budget deficit is widening. Egypt is also trying to preserve the benefits from its economic reform program. All that will lead to more funding through other debt tools.
To cushion the COVID-19 economic slowdown, the government has so far spent $2.5 billion out of $6.3 earlier allocated for the pandemic. These and the new IMF fund would help the authorities to support social protection programs dedicated to vulnerable groups and assist impacted sectors. The pandemic has made more than 90 countries inquire about IMF funds. By definition, this week's rapid financing instrument does not dictate any measures on the government. It is designed to provide support to nations without full-fledged programs, which is a big relief for Egyptians who are still coping with the harsh impact of the IMF's earlier $12 billion loan. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And heading to Nigeria now, cases of COVID-19 have nearly doubled since the country eased its lockdown order in 3 major cities, Abuja, Lagos and Ogun State. Now, authorities are scaling up on health facilities in the country. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more.
Officials tour this newly commissioned isolation and treatment center in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Nigeria called for swift interventions and expansion of health facilities following a spike in the coronavirus cases. This comes a week after the country began loosening up its lockdown order across its major cities. The space would accommodate hundreds more affected by the virus.
We are receiving, on behalf of the citizens of the FCT, a very magnificent, well-established COVID-19 treatment center from the Ministerial Committee on COVID-19. This is a purely private sector-led intervention, which has culminated in this facility that has given us an isolation and treatment center that can boast of 500 beds plus. In addition to this facility you are seeing here, the committee has also intervened by providing a 350 kVA generator to the University of Abuja Teaching Hospital Isolation Center.
Major cities mostly hit by the virus have spent about 5 weeks on total lockdown. Since relaxing on it, government has increased community-based testing too. They also urge citizens to play their parts by complying with safety measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus.
As you are aware, for the last 1 week, a gradual process of easing of lockdown had commenced in the FCT. But our experience has shown that the wider community, up to now, is not very compliant with respect to social distancing and all the other items mentioned. If this thing gets out of hand, even though we are now almost boasting of a 1,000 bed spaces within the FCT, we may just wake up and realize that 1,000 will not be enough.
As the pandemic rapidly spreads across the country, authorities are in discussions with private investors on possible new collaborations for more isolation and treatment centers. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's turn our attention now to corporate headlines for today. Tanzania's central bank has lowered the statutory minimum reserves requirement for commercial banks to 6% from 7%. It will also cut its discount rate for banks to 5% from 7%. Now, the move is aimed at cushioning the economy from the effects of the coronavirus crisis. The reduction of the reserves will come into effect on June 8th to provide additional liquidity to banks. And South Africa's Shoprite Holding says sales of beauty products such as hair coloring kits and conditioners have soared at its supermarkets. This has been attributed to the 5-week lockdown that has seen consumers turn to do-it-yourself treatments while salons remain shut. Its rival Pick n Pay said it saw a 92% sales volume growth of hair coloring products during the lockdown. And Toyota says it expects profits to drop 80% to its lowest in 9 years. It forecast operating profit of $4.66 billion for the year through March 2021 from $22.7 billion in the year just ended. Now, Toyota President Akio Toyoda said at a live-streamed media briefing that the coronavirus has dealt them a bigger shock than the 2008 global financial crisis. He also said it expects sales to recover to 2019 levels next year. And Saudi Arabian state oil giant Aramco has reported a 25% fall in first quarter net profit. Analysts had expected a profit of about $17.8 billion. Brent crude prices, of course, have fallen 65% in the first quarter. Now, this is before OPEC plus producers agreed to cut oil supply by a record 9.7 million barrels per day starting from May in order to help shore up prices and curb oversupply. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now. Do stay with us. More business news coming up.
Is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, African nations can adapt and respond to demand. That's according to the Director of Regional Integration and Trade at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, Stephen Karinji. He cites, amongst others, South Africa and Nigeria, where companies have converted operations to producing respiratory masks and ventilators. There have, however, been fears that between 300,000 and 3.3 million Africans could lose their lives as a direct result of the pandemic. Well, let's talk to the man, UN Economic Commission for Africa Director for Regional Integration and Trade, Mr. Stephen Karinji. He joins us now in Addis Ababa. Welcome to the show, sir. Great to have you. Now, trading under the AFCFTA framework was meant to start this July. However, we've seen COVID-19 come in with a whole new level of trade and movement restrictions on the continent. So how do you think this affects AFCFTA's agenda going forward and certainly trade on the continent?
Thank you very much, Uche. Good evening. It is indeed true that COVID-19 has interfered with the timelines of the completion of the outstanding issues of the AFCFTA negotiations that were going to be necessary for the trading to start on the 1st of July 2020. But having said that, what COVID-19 has also done is actually to show everyone, especially all the state parties and the African citizens, the urgency with which the AFCFTA negotiations needs to be concluded and the implementation to start. Because we have observed that Africa requires 94%, or at least to get 94% of what it needs in terms of pharmaceuticals from the rest of the world. And so if we had the AFCFTA already in place, regional value chains could actually have evolved that would allow us to be able to supply some of these goods from within the continent. So if I were to be asked what I think COVID-19 has done to the AFCFTA agenda, it's basically to spotlight the importance of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and also to ask the state parties to pose and ask the question, is it possible for us to accelerate some of the things that were backloading, be it the opening up of e-commerce? Shouldn't this be the time that we should actually start thinking about e-commerce? Because we have seen digital trade and the digital economy has actually been very useful for helping economies to deal with the pandemic.
Well, sir, some economic experts don't have your optimism. Some trade experts actually say that they expect to see governments turn increasingly protectionist as, of course, they try to limit the economic damage from this pandemic. Now, for example, they expect to see a renewed focus on saving favored industries in specific countries. Do you think Africa could head in that direction?
Actually, from where I've started, what we have observed is that the supply chains have actually been disrupted. What is it that has resulted out of those disrupted supply chains? What has happened is that there has been scarcity, and where you have scarcity, you have higher prices. So indeed, if you want to, as a government or as a country, to be able to make things accessible so that your consumers or people who require services, including health services, for them to get the rightly priced and get access to the services, what you need to do is not to become protectionist, but rather to work with everyone else so that at least you can create a competitive economy. Now, for Africa, I want to insist that what we need are regional supply chains that are competitive, that work. And when we have a pandemic like this, we should not be having that reaction of closing, breaking those supply chains, but rather making sure that every part of Africa has access to these supplies. So it is true that we have seen countries becoming protectionist, but maybe those are countries that could actually be able to get those COVID supplies, medical supplies at any cost. We do not have that luxury as a continent that we close our economies because we cannot be able to pay any price that is offered in the market.
Well, going forward, the UN Economic Commission for Africa actually estimates that the continent needs at least $100 billion in terms of fiscal stimulus to address, of course, healthcare needs and provide a safety net and an economic cushion going forward. Now, experts also say of the $9 trillion that is in fiscal and monetary stimulus internationally, mobilized internationally, Africa will only access about 2%. So where do you see this $100 billion coming from? And do you agree with those who say Africa's best bet going forward is debt relief?
At the moment, the African economies were expected to grow by at least 3% in 2020. But our projections show we are likely to end up to see our economy contracting by about 3%, between 2.6% and 3%. What that means, there's going to be a reduced fiscal space for African countries to be able to mobilize additional domestic revenues for them to be able to deal with the pandemic. Now, it's important for everyone to realize that actually Africa for this year, it had an outlay of at least $138 billion to invest in the health sector, to provide services and goods. But because of the pandemic and because of the expected extra expenditures, the governments need more money. Now, where will this money come from? With the contracting economy, with the exports falling, there is case and there is merit for the international community to come in and be part of the provision of this $100 billion. But where is this money coming from? Already many countries had already budgeted for their debt service repayment, for their interest payment, and even principal. So this $100 billion is supposed to come from the money that Africa had already budgeted for, but it gets it through what we are calling for as a debt standstill. So if you had budgeted $10 billion to service your debt, rather than using that money to service your debt today, you are given 1 to 2 years so that you can at least have access to that $10 billion to be able to provide the kind of services and the kind of support that the health sector needs, the safety net that countries need to provide to the vulnerable people in their republics.
Now, the UN Economic Commission for Africa also says the coronavirus could see the slowing of growth to 1.8% on the continent, and this is your best case scenario going forward. So realistically, what are your thoughts on Africa's response so far, and how does that inform your outlook for the continent post-coronavirus?
Actually, the outlook for the continent is going to depend on what we do today. And that is why this $100 billion is important. Because besides saving lives, this $100 billion is also supposed to go towards helping save the African private sector. Because without liquidity, with the private sector having to service its credit lines, and that money is not there because of the lockdowns. So if governments concentrate on ensuring that they save lives and they save jobs and they save businesses, then the outlook is such that we can actually have a quick recovery out of the pandemic. But if we do not have the right action today, including ensuring that farmers get inputs to invest, to do their planting, it's going to be a very difficult time post the pandemic. So the outlook depends on what we do today. And I think governments know what they need to do. And all the policy measures that we have seen being taken by many countries to try to save their private sector is exactly what Africa needs to do, even as it takes care of the vulnerable populations in our urban and rural sectors.
Well, we do have to leave this interesting discussion there. Many thanks for joining us in the studio. Of course, that was Stephen Karenji. He is from the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Well, let's move on now to South Africa. The country may have relaxed some of its COVID-19 restrictions, but the damage for some businesses could be permanent. Many businesses are still not back to full capacity due to the restrictions under lockdown. South Africa is now at level 4, which means most coffee shops and restaurants in the country can't trade just yet. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with the story.
Jonathan Robinson's Been There coffee company was lucky to stay open under the lockdown as a supplier to the supermarkets, but he's unable to supply the rest of his clients.
It's been incredibly tough because we've dropped off probably 80% at least of our business. We normally supply coffee to restaurants, cafes, a lot of the hospitality industry, so we supply hotels, luxury game lodges, boutique hotels, etc. And obviously that business, as well as all the corporate business, has all just disappeared. And so, yeah, we were in a space of really hustling.
Robinson has spent decades in the coffee industry. All of his coffee beans are bought through the fair trade market from countries like Rwanda, Tanzania, Burundi and others. But now Been There only buys a fraction of the coffee beans it used to, and it's had to let go of half of its staff. Tabiso Mokwena is one of the few remaining.
It's so unfortunate that we cannot all be here. We work well as a team. I miss them so much. Yeah, this is a place where we spend most of our time here at work. We like brothers and sisters. I understand now things are hard, but hopefully we pray that things will get back to normal.
Kramer's coffee shop, one of the many customers Been There supplies to, is struggling with very little foot traffic.
We're only managing to just make under 20% even of our target. So that business is not there. So we're strategically trying to even get ourselves out there more. We've been going to offices, trying to give our business cards so that people can call in more so we can deliver to them.
For Tubatse to stay in business, he has to sell at least 350 cups of coffee a week. Right now, he's not even brewing half of that.
Robinson and Tubatse, like hundreds of other business owners, are struggling to stay alive until the country returns to normal. This situation was reflected in the latest Business Confidence Index, which came in at 89.9 points, the worst reading in over 35 years. So many businesses are trying to hold on, but this wait may be too long. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, the World Bank has approved a grant of $40 million to provide income support to 65,000 households in South Sudan for the next 2.5 years. Now, aid agencies say the country will need more funding in the coming months to try and mitigate food insecurity and the effects of the coronavirus. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with more.
More than 4 million South Sudanese people are still refugees. They are expected to return to the country following the relative stability due to the implementation of the 2018 South Sudan Peace Deal. The World Bank's International Development Association says the money is expected to help those households rebuild their livelihoods.
COVID-19 is not our only shock. It's not our only problem in South Sudan. We have a locust infestation which is growing. We have malaria season coming. We have the rain coming which will bring waterborne diseases.
More than half of South Sudan's population faces acute food shortage, according to the World Food Programme, and the government's main focus now is to ensure there is no return to war so that the population can rebuild their lives.
I would like to encourage our young people to work hard and move the country forward. No one will build this nation except you. All those who have gone to other countries as refugees would come back and they need services. We should use this money from the World Bank to provide education, build our roads, but most importantly, be united and maintain peace.
The project by the World Bank, known as Safety Net, has been running in South Sudan since 2017. Some residents are temporarily employed by the project to maintain roads and schools in their localities.
Some people were saying the youth don't want to work, but there were no job opportunities for us. With this project now, many young people are working. Those who used to sit idle are now busy. As a result of this project and the youth working, we have seen a reduction in the crime rate in this area.
The $40 million grant by the World Bank is expected to last for 2.5 years.
The World Bank says this phase of the project will also provide direct cash transfers and income security to people with disabilities, the elderly, expectant women, and those living with HIV/AIDS. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come. China announces a new list of 79 U.S. products that will be eligible for import tariff waivers for 1 year. And the silver lining amidst the coronavirus pandemic for self-driving cars.
Again, he can hold in guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Just about 1:30. Here's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, Somalia has registered the biggest daily jump of COVID-19 cases, with 81 infections in the last 24 hours. The country now has over 1,100 cases with 52 deaths and 126 recoveries. The rising infection is attributed to community transmission. And Egypt is slowly easing some of its coronavirus measures, but infection rates have risen significantly, leading to many questioning whether restrictions were relaxed too soon. And the world has been marking International Nurses Day in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Nurses have faced many challenges in trying to stop the spread of the highly infectious diseases like Ebola, measles, and the coronavirus. And while there is currently no cure for COVID-19 or a vaccine against it, many people have resorted to boosting immunity through the use of home remedies. There are a number of herbal recipes floating around the internet, while some Tanzanians are turning to traditional options such as herbal steaming in order to build immunity to stave off the coronavirus. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, let's turn our attention to the international front. China's finance ministry has announced a new list of 79 U.S. products that will be eligible for import tariff waivers for 1 year. Now, the imports include rare earth ore, medical disinfectant, and some aviation materials. The ministry also says the waivers will take effect next Tuesday and end on May 18th, 2021. Meanwhile, the coronavirus pandemic in the U.S. is highlighting a deep and long-standing economic divide. While many office staff can switch to working from home, most low-income workers don't have that option. And as CGTN's Giles Gibson reports from Washington, restaurant employees are amongst the hardest hit.
Restaurants across the U.S. have been closed for weeks as authorities enforce strict lockdown measures. Some states are lifting those restrictions, but thousands of restaurant workers have already lost their jobs.
I've been in the restaurant industry for just over 10 years now.
Hayden Smith, who lives in Nashville in Tennessee, is one of them.
We were forced to close like mid-March. I think it was like the 16th or so. And since then, I mean, it's just been, a lot of financial turmoil. All of April, I just had to let bills go unpaid and just hope they would work with me, on late fees and stuff.
Rock United, a group that represents restaurant workers, says it received more than 10,000 applications in 2 weeks for its emergency relief fund. The organisation says many restaurant staff don't have benefits that are helping office workers get through this crisis.
They don't have family paid leave or family sick leave or any paid leave at all, just in case they fall ill or someone in the family falls ill. So the situation is dire.
The global inequality gap isn't anything new. Presidents, economists and activists discuss it every year at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
Meeting after meeting, year after year, the main problem being discussed is the inequality gap and the widening of the inequality gap. And then they come back end of January to work, to their positions. And I think awareness is there. Today, of course, awareness is there. But I don't know that it's followed with a lot of action.
The United Nations says this crisis could be a catalyst for a decade of action to reduce inequality worldwide. For now, though, low-income workers like restaurant staff are just hoping to get back to work. Here in the US capital, restrictions are set to last for at least another week. Social distancing means that when restaurants do reopen, they'll likely have reduced capacity, and that could mean fewer jobs for servers. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
And more news from Asia. Thai airline pilots and cabin crew are now on leave and their pay packets are cut by 80%, and that's due to the coronavirus pandemic. Now, some have swapped their smart uniforms for more humdrum overalls to weather the crisis, keeping them on the ground. CGTN's Martin Lowe reports from Bangkok.
We're more used to hearing them say, prepare for takeoff or fasten your seatbelts, but these are far from normal times. COVID-19 has affected everyone. not least airline pilots and cabin crew who'd usually be flying to destinations across Asia and beyond. With flights grounded, they're on furlough, their pay packets reduced by 80%. But they had an idea. Instead of flying people to their destination, they formed a delivery business of a different kind, carrying food, parcels and documents by car and motorbike. Around 300 have joined a cooperative in Thailand called Delivery by Pilots and Crew.
Pilots and crew have no flights at the moment, so many have started their own business, such as cooking and selling online. Delivery was expensive, so now some of us have started a delivery business.
Today's delivery is fresh orange juice, squeezed and bottled in another home business started by furloughed flight attendants. Aircrew are trained to cope with emergencies, and they weren't going to let a little virus turbulence throw them off their stride. Though they'd much rather be flying for the moment than making the most of a more down-to-earth routine. COSIT cooks meals as well as delivering them. Earnings are a far cry from flight pay, but it's enough to keep the crews going until they can once again take to the skies.
As a flight attendant, we have to be helpful and good at communicating. It is the same for a delivery man, except it means working down here, not up in the air.
It feels special to have my lunch delivered by an airline person. Normally, we only see them flying somewhere, not on the ground.
Furloughed aircrew in Thailand have launched a range of stopgap businesses. One group of aircraft engine maintenance staff are now repairing air conditioners. One thing it's shown is that for airline personnel, even when they're on the ground, the sky's the limit. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Bangkok.
Now, many businesses in Turkey, such as restaurants, hotels and theatres, have taken a hit due to COVID-19. Shopping malls are closed, factories are shut down, but one industry in particular is flourishing: disinfection services. CGTN's Mikhail Bardavid reports.
If there's one thing that people around the world want right now, it's to keep safe from COVID-19. Health officials are stressing hygiene, and for businesses, that means using disinfection services. The disinfection industry in Turkey has been booming. In Istanbul, we're seeing new disinfection businesses pop up in small districts. For example, many car washers have added disinfecting cars to their services. This one has a large banner advertising just that.
Right now, we have an intense demand due to COVID-19. So many people have started to provide this service, but it's beneficial, it's healthy, as long as they use ministry-approved products. We think it's a good thing.
Uzman is a disinfection company that's been around since 1997. It has been providing services to a number of industries, especially health, food, logistics, and production.
We have gained experience from the past. We're putting the lessons learned during SARS, the swine flu and the bird flu to use in the fight against COVID-19.
Cingitaş says there's been a huge demand for their services.
We have new clients that didn't have a clue about disinfection before. These are mostly large global corporations that employ over 100 people. Many of them had never used disinfection services, but are now among our new clientele.
One of them believes everyone should be applying these measures.
We regularly disinfect our offices because we really care about our employees and our customers. We too are important, of course. Our company will continue to take all the necessary precautions to end the spread of the virus.
As the Turkish government prepares to ease some restrictions, many businesses open to the public will likely be required to disinfect, making the industry even more critical in the months to come. Mikhail Bardavid, CGTN, Istanbul.
Now, when it comes to setting guidelines for access to public beaches, many U.S. coastal states have been struggling to find a balance between residents' demands and, of course, their safety. Now, the latest easing of restrictions comes with strict rules that require social distancing on the beaches and, of course, a ban on gatherings. Now, some local residents have embraced the changes, but others are concerned that the pandemic may continue. CGTN's Adiz Tiansan reports from Los Angeles.
Summer has long arrived in some of the southern coastal states, but some beach enthusiasts hardly got a taste of what defines their city, especially around this time.
I'm ecstatic, honestly. Just to see the people out. I mean, you know, it was shut down for a while, so we didn't get to enjoy, you know, the full benefits of what everybody comes to California for.
Currently, California's beaches only allow for active recreation, like running, walking, biking, swimming, and surfing. But in the first weekend since the state's reopening of its coastline, some beachgoers took their usual spot, overlooking the current restrictions in place that prevent visitors from laying down their towels and hanging around, a cause for concern for some locals.
Even though they put rules in place, nobody's abiding by them, and so this keeps it going. Instead of having 2 weeks, we're going to end up with a lockdown, literally, where everything's closed.
This is what some of the Orange County beaches looked like at the end of April, with the arrival of the first heat wave. Scenes that prompted Governor Gavin Newsom to issue a statewide order to shut down all beaches.
We're going to have a temporary pause on the beaches down there.
It didn't go down well with majority Trump supporters who took to the streets calling for a total reopening. Many are glad that a compromise was reached through a partial reopening, but health officials warn about the risks.
I don't like to see people sick. I don't like to see people who can't breathe. I don't like to put 20, 30, 40-year-old people on ventilators. I mean, that's really heartbreaking. And so I would encourage us to continue to be engaged. I would encourage us to continue to understand the science and the reason why our public health officials are recommending what they recommend.
From the politician's standpoint, opening up too early is a risk, just as opening up too late may also be a risk. For California and all other coastal state governors, these are critical weeks ahead as they watch for health and economic indicators while their residents look forward to normalization. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Now, the car industry is in for a bumpy ride due to the pandemic-led recession, but with social distancing becoming more common even post-COVID, does it boost the case for self-driving cars? CGTN's Cheng Lei checks out the state of play.
No slowing down for self-driving startup Pony AI, even during the pandemic.
We are aiming at providing the safest and most reliable autonomous driving solutions. And by having more traffic scenarios, that will make our technology and our product to be more universal.
Autonomous driving is getting extra oomph in China. Multiple cities are rolling out on-road testing. While simulation can generate a huge number of testing miles, it only prepares cars for real-life testing. Can cars recognize speed bumps, road signs, delivery riders? Robo-taxis are coming your way in the capital city. All I do is plug in the destination on a mini app on my phone, and companies like Pony AI are starting passenger testing for their autonomous driver vehicles. So I'm in the back of this autonomous vehicle, and you might think, why is it so full in here? Well, by law, there has to be a safety driver in the driver's seat, although he has his hands off the wheel. As my cameraman, is me, and of course our engineer who is testing this technology, Ya Xiong.
Yeah.
Great to have you on the show. So 2 years ago, we did a round at the testing center together.
Yeah.
What's changed about your technology?
The roads are very complicated in Yizhuang, and you can see there are
It's very busy.
intersections and busy traffic. So we need to continuously develop our technology to solve such complicated scenarios.
here I am at my destination. I hope this is how I'll be getting to work soon. Hopes rest on China's new infrastructure investments to fire up the economy. Spending is estimated at 1 trillion yuan or $140 billion in 2020 alone.
Many of the directions of the new infrastructure are highly related to autonomous driving, such as 5G, big data, AI, and the smart city. This will speed up the autonomous driving industry. On the other hand, autonomous driving technology is part of the smart city and the smart mobility. Advances of autonomous driving technology will boost development of the China's AI industry.
But even if the algorithms can get the complicated Beijing city traffic down pat, tech developers are calling for wider testing.
We need more testing area and scenarios in China, like highway or even the country road.
With the global autonomous driving industry going through a reset due to economic pressures, the pandemic is also driving home the promise of safer roads and healthier riders. Those with abundant capital and robust technology will enjoy longer runways and narrower fields. Cheng Lei, CGTN.
And on that note, let's turn our attention to commodity markets today. Now, oil prices were boosted by an unexpected commitment from Saudi Arabia to deepen production cuts in June. Now, the UAE and Kuwait are also committed to cut an extra 180,000 barrels per day in total. That adds to reductions that producers agreed to, or rather already agreed to, under an OPEC deal. But of course, there are still fears in the market that output cuts are still not enough. Consumption could be hit again by a second wave of infections. Meanwhile, gold prices rose today. We saw that safe haven appeal was boosted by those same worries, though of course a stronger dollar capped some of those gains. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still coming up on the show. A mechanical engineer in Somalia develops a ventilator to help his country deal with the pandemic.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Now in Somalia, a young mechanical engineer has built a prototype ventilator. He hopes it will help COVID-19 patients in his country with an inadequate healthcare system.
21-year-old Mohammed Adawe is on his way to a hospital in Mogadishu to test out his prototype ventilator. He decided to put his skills to good use when Somalia announced its first COVID-19 death.
I saw in the name of Allah, the situation in the country and the coronavirus is very critical. People are dying of the coronavirus and a lack of oxygen because there are very few ventilators in the country.
We are very proud of him. It gives us a lot of encouragement to see young Somalis trying to do best for their people. Mohammed knew that this was a critical moment for Somali people since we didn't have that much equipment for fighting the coronavirus disease.
Somalia's health system is ill-equipped to fight the virus. There are only 19 ventilators available in a country with a population of approximately 15 million people.
What we need for the time being urgently is to get the medical equipments we have requested several times. Yes, we are getting some, but as I was talking about the testing, PCRs, we need rapid tests, we need ventilators, we need oxygen plants, which is missing in the country, and for all states, because the need in Mogadishu or in Banadar is the same as such of the rest of the countries, of all the states.
My message to the international community is I need help. I could make more than 20 new ventilators that could save the lives of many Somali people. I'm capable of doing so, but I don't have the financial means.
Mohammed's invention may seem basic, but his makeshift machine can save lives. So far, Somalia has 51 COVID-19 deaths, the highest number of fatalities in the region. Chaumhono, CGTN.
Now, in Burkina Faso, a young entrepreneur has set up an automatic disinfection system to help fight COVID-19. Mohamed Bila plans to scale up production. That's if he receives support from the government.
It's the latest innovation in Burkina Faso aimed at curbing the spread of coronavirus in the country. This disinfecting booth is electrically powered and consists of a highly sensitive motion sensor.
I found that most people wash their hands and put on mufflers, yet the virus can be present on other parts of the body. I also saw that the disease was spreading very quickly in Burkina Faso. That's how I came up with the idea of putting up something in place to support the health system in my country. So I thought, why not create a system that will disinfect the whole body? So I went ahead and talked to my brother, who is a metal welder, and asked him to help me implement this idea. I received good feedback after posting on social networks.
When you go inside this disinfectant booth, the spray is all over. The body is totally disinfected. It's really a great initiative to support so that the distribution is done very quickly, since we are looking for ways to decontain it.
Named Stop COVID-19, the device could be a game changer in public places where crowds lack hand sanitizers.
I am very pleased to be the initiator of this project, which is helping to combat the spread of the virus in my country. My team and I are ready to work. We are looking at how to produce 20 machines every 10 days.
We have tried to offer our brother moral and financial support, and we are very happy. But at the moment, we are really asking our state to try to support young people who have similar ideas so that Africa can evolve.
There's been a rise in innovation since the beginning of COVID-19. The pandemic has simply demonstrated what human imagination is capable of in the face of adversity. Chamhono, CGTN.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand weakened as, of course, global fears of a second wave of coronavirus infections dampened demand for emerging currencies. And, of course, investors are now shying away from risky assets. Now, analysts say they expect that the currency is likely to remain volatile and highly susceptible to international events. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.